just a funny thing because it was June. The fertility clinic is festooned with pride flags and like all these like pictures of, you know, cute interracial gay dads. But again, it was just, you know, despite all the pride flags, just like a very confusing setup for people. Welcome to Don't Think Twice. Vijay and Stevens is the writing and producing duo of Amrita, Vijay, and Andrew Stevens. Best friends, business partners, creative partners, and now soon to be co-parents. This week, the baby gets made. Our host and friend Marina Weiss walks us through the year from deciding to do it to it getting done. We do discuss pregnancy loss in this episode, so do with that what you will.
Yeah. So you had frozen the twins, and you knew that they were in a freezer. And then what happened?
So that was completed in the pandemic. In summer of 2020, we were locked down in our apartments. And so our focus turned to where everyone was at that point, not knowing where the future was. So our leases came up and we put our stuff in storage to move out of the city because the work we were doing was also delayed because live events weren't happening. So we decided to spend a month in Detroit and landed in Cape Cod for a few months. And then in early 2021, went to New Orleans initially for 3 months. And we kept extending and extending because we enjoyed it so much. And in that time when we had a few months under our belt in New Orleans and were able to think, and vaccines were coming into the world, we're starting to understand
that there was a future.
The world was going to move forward in some way.
Yeah.
That reignited the conversation about having children. And in that same time, we had lived together, and we've touched on this in a previous episode. We had
lived together for the first time.
And so that had changed our relationship a bit. And so it was then that we sort of looked at each other and, you know, what are we waiting for? There's no guarantee on anything. I mean, before the pandemic, I think we had on some level, an expectation that we'd be somewhere professionally, financially,
romantically,
maybe even
whatever,
romantically, that then we would decide that the next thing to do would be to put some...
You know, I'm glad that you refreshed my memory of that, of how much the role the pandemic actually played in that, because that really was kind of existentially important to this conversation, because absolutely there's this idea that it's like, well, I don't want to be in a certain place in my career. I want to be in a certain place creatively. I want to have completed certain things creatively. I want to, like, you know, things were going so well at the beginning of 2020, and a lot of people relate to that, where I was like, man, our business is going like gangbusters, like, you know, our like pitching process, our creative endeavors are really going really well, and then it just all out of our control. And even in normal times, is like, oh, there's never a good time, there's never a right time. But especially that being like, well, even if I had gotten myself into a place where I felt like I was in the right romantic relationship or the right career spot or whatever, who's to say that wouldn't all get taken away the next day? Security and getting yourself to a certain place of comfort is like kind of an illusion. So why wait for that?
That's such an interesting idea, that the pandemic kind of stripped you of these illusions and let you know that, like, if this is a goal for you, it could be a goal sooner, rather than waiting for your like Rihanna level success before you have your offspring.
And so it was springtime, summer, that in New Orleans, that we looked at each other. And
but that's also so interesting that it was in New Orleans, because I feel like New Orleans is such a vibrant place. It's such a place that makes things feel possible.
Well, it's a vibrant place, I think, because of its proximity to mortality. For me, it adds like extra like urgency for life.
And so it sounds like you're not totally sure what the contents of that conversation were, Or like what made you decide that it was now and to actually pursue this?
Well, I don't remember exactly the conversation, but I do know that this was also around the time when Amrita, the concept of being a more active parent
started to change a little bit.
Started to change.
Yeah.
We didn't even try before you had a notion that you wanted to be more active.
I think that's right.
So I guess my question is, do you remember at all between the embryo freezing
when I was thinking of myself later, as the
something happened in that year. Yeah. I mean, a lot happened in that year.
I don't know that there's like a really like logical progression from thinking like I never want to be I'm certain that I do not want to be a parent to saying I would like a more active role. Kind of what we were just talking about of like sort of the existential dread of especially being in New York. I mean, Marina, like, you know, that as, you know, as acutely as we do during 2020 was like really, I think that's going to be something that we think about for a long time and try to like grapple with how crazy that was.
I mean, and just to give people who might be listening to this color, like there was no time where there was like for me, like even a brief period where I could forget about how acutely the pandemic was affecting people. And it was this incredible helplessness and terrifying.
Yeah. I mean, it was I think a huge thing that we all shared that experience. And, so, I mean, I think again, like if I was trying to put a narrative to my, like changing my mind, or evolving my mindset around that, like maybe that was more of a part of it than, you know, than I care to think, but like, but I think it really was just because everything was so exploded. You know, we exploded the structure of our business. It was very lucrative. It was very stable. And then all that stability kind of went out the window. And I think part of that is just like, you know, exploding all those structures is exploding the expectation that like parenthood had to look a certain way. And the idea that like a family structure can be different, or that like, that what am I actually rejecting when I say that I didn't want to be a parent? You know, having a lot of time to myself to think that, it became more clear to me that I wasn't really rejecting the idea of being a parent, but I was rejecting the idea of being like a wife and a mom in these like very, you know, what I perceived as those tropes and the expectations that they carried with them, the expectations of like what it means to be a wife, what it means to be somebody's wife, and what it means to like be a mom in that context it still feels very terrifying and to me, being a mom, being a mother terminology, because I think it has so much baggage around like what we expect of moms and you know, women within a family structure. That was the core part of that decision, was kind of untangling that what I wanted to distance myself from was like the role that I perceived, and the heavy burden that I perceived of being like in a nuclear family, being a mom.
And let me summarize, and correct me if I'm getting this wrong, but what I'm hearing is like there was a fear of losing yourself and losing your creative self in the self-sacrifice that was like culturally ingrained in the idea of what motherhood was. And I think it's so interesting to frame it that way, because I think, Andrew, I know you as well to be somebody who is like in many ways very good at being a caregiver without any kind of hangups about that, right? So I think in some ways you are such a complementary parenting pair in that, like, Amrita, you're so conscious of the ways in which society is telling women who are parents that they need to drop everything else in favor of parenting and
right.
devote themselves in such an intense way that that's been repulsive to you. And I feel like you really fought some of the socialization around that. And Andrew, I see you like as kind of the inverse, where you're very comfortable caregiving and less comfortable receiving care.
Right.
Do you have any fears about getting lost in parenting losing yourself in the caregiving process in any way? Or do you have other kinds of fears?
Oh, plenty of fears. Plenty of fears about...
I can also redirect us. So how did you decide how to proceed? Like once you decided, okay, I'm comfortable with parenthood. Andrew's comfortable with parenthood.
I said, okay, like I told Andrew, like, well, actually I do want to parent this child. I think there's like some, there's some conversation that needed to happen between us too. I mean, I think you were very open about, you, Andrew, were very open about saying like, I'm open to discussing like whatever kind of like, however much you want to be involved in.
So I couched it as like, I will be raising this child. It can be 100% me, or it can be any percentage otherwise, up to 50. And you can choose your own adventure. So I hope it felt like there was no pressure.
I think you were remarkably open to that, which I think is notable. Like that you were willing to envision this as being a 100% parenting or 50% parenting. And that was equally just like kind of...
I mean, not really. I mean, a child is not really yours. It's just like you're raising it.
Okay.
Khalil Gibran agrees with you. I think that that's a beautiful idea. But I also think that in this case, like this child is literally your idea. Like if you hadn't pushed for this child, I don't think Amrita would have individually gone for it.
And yet, a child is not mine.
Yeah, so I think I was maybe still even coming to that decision of like, what's my role? But I was very much like had turned a corner on the idea that like, okay, I want to take a more active role in parenting and in raising the child.
So we had 2 embryos, but we also had time. And so we decided, and by time, I mean, Amrita was only a year older than she was. And
you were also a year older. Everyone was a year older.
Yeah.
So we decided to try, I say the new old-fashioned way.
Not the old-fashioned.
Not the old-fashioned way, which is intercourse. The new old-fashioned way just requires a syringe.
Well, we didn't quite we didn't quite figure that out.
There were trial and error, but it turns out the best method for those who are curious involves a syringe without a needle. For those who are picturing a syringe with a needle.
Yeah. So basically, the order of operations, though, is that I then had to get my IUD out that had survived so many travails, including the actual egg extraction. So I thanked it for its service and sent it on its Viking funeral. So our first strategy, if you don't mind me getting into the gory details, was like a diva cup, like a silicone menstrual cup. And
that fits snug.
And the idea was that, okay, well, that's going to like keep things. Yeah. It's
so
going to
keep put material in, then you insert it, and then you put your legs up a wall.
And then it stays, so then it has nowhere to go, except we thought up. And the other thing that you have to, that was like very surprising to me about the process is that like I sort of always had this impression that it's like if you ever have unprotected sex, you'll just get pregnant immediately. And then when you're actually trying to intentionally become pregnant, it becomes clear that the actual window of like female fertility within a month is like 24 to 36 hours and maybe even less than that. So the process involves a giant box of like 100 paper strips, which you dip into your own urine every day and track your what's called luteinizing hormone. It's your LH level. So you track it, you sort of understand what it looks like for a normal level for you. It's different for everybody, what it shows up on the strip. And then like when it becomes positive, it's not like the COVID test where any line is a positive. It has to be darker than the other line. And that means that you are somewhere in the 24 to 36 hour window. So Like that's the starting gun. So it's not that scientific in a way. Like it's a miraculously scientific in some ways. You can just do this at home, but it's also not as precise as I wanted it to be. I really wanted there to be a science to it. I wanted my body to be like so regular. It was like, you know, some days it was ovulating on the 12th day. Sometimes it was like the 20th day, you know? So there's a wide variance. I found myself very frustrated with it.
Yeah, you were, and it was hard to follow.
Yeah, because I wasn't following it myself.
I wanted a yes or no, and
I was like, I don't know. It looked like being like, is that line darker? Would you say this is the same color? Are these two different purples?
It's like the dress problem.
Yeah, driving myself wild. Like, so we went through a few cycles of that, trial and error. You know,
all failure.
How much failure? Like how many?
Cycles?
So we tried in August.
3 or 4.
We probably tried in September. We probably skipped October because we were moving back to New York at that point. We might have tried one more time at the end of the year. Maybe not. Yeah. We had been using the Diva Cup silicone seal situation. And then we decided to try a new strategy after that. This is when the syringes came into play.
Yeah, and really it was when you want to get something done, ask a lesbian.
So we got some friendly advice to use the syringe.
To place the sample as close to its destination as possible.
Well, yes, as you can imagine, but it's just the advantages of a syringe. And the first time it worked.
Yeah, immediately.
Wow.
Affordable,
100,
effective.
100 for like $5.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, highly recommend.
So what month was that, May?
May.
You know, at the same time, we are trying to get all the people together to make a movie that we're going to make later on that summer. And we're, you know, still working. We have some other, you know, things going on. And Amrita says, you know, I think it worked. I said, well, did it work? And she's like, I think it worked. And, you know, taking an at-home pregnancy test. And it's like, I think this is, I'm not sure.
Squinting at the 2 line, which the pregnancy test, much like the COVID test, is any line is a positive.
So we weren't sure. The line wasn't that strong. And then we went back to the fertility clinic to confirm the pregnancy. And then what happened?
And then they were monitoring my blood levels, you know, and keep in mind, like, I think if you were somebody who was just sort of like, you weren't like actively trying to get pregnant with the level of intention that we were, like you might not have even perceived that you were pregnant this early. It's very, very, very early. So at this point, they're just looking for the hormone levels to double every 48 hours or something like that. So at first things were progressing that way. And then at a certain point, they're like, well, they're not.
The levels aren't going up fast enough. This is not viable.
Not viable, right? Like now it's like you have to just wait and see if your body is going to kind of like naturally have like what you would again, if medicine was involved at this point, you would just perceive it as being like a heavy period, but like, so that'll either happen at home, or our worry is if it doesn't happen, then there will have to be more medical intervention, which would be in the form of like a DNC. So that eventually did happen, like pretty heavy bleed, which was painful. It was like an uncomfortable. It was like just a very, very heavy period feeling. And that was kind of that. It kind of, I mean, it was a little bit, I think I was a little bit bummed actually, like that you were out of town when that happened, just because, we were very private about it and like hadn't told anybody, probably 8 weeks, you know, something like that at that point. So it was very early. Like I didn't really want to tell people not because I had any like shame about it or anything, but because then I'm telling people that we're trying.
Mm-hmm.
And then I felt like, oh, this means I'm now setting up an expectation that that people are going to ask me about later. And then I'm going to have to keep people posted, you know, and I think that was probably a false assumption. You know, our friends may not have actually had any expectation at all. But
yeah. And I mean, I can understand that, but I also think, you know, we have a lot of flexible friends and you could have set an explicit verbal boundary and been like, hey, I just want to let you know this happened, but I also want you to know I don't want to, you know, open myself up to checking in about it later. Like that I would just want to give you this positive info, and I would like to ask your permission to like set a boundary. It's totally normal that you felt bummed about this, right? Miscarriages can be hard, but I think also for like hormonal reasons, like your body changes gears really fast when you have a miscarriage, and it can often feel like a kind of hormone cliff for a lot of people.
Yeah, but in general, I think another reason that I didn't tell people is because I felt like I wasn't going to be performing the right role of like person having a miscarriage because I wasn't like that torn up about it. Mm-hmm. So I felt like if I read people in, like the expectation was that I was going to be like grief stricken and that I was going to be expected to like perform like grief in a certain way. And, you know, we sort of alluded to this off the air, but like, we just don't talk about miscarriage. It's like a very common experience for a lot of people, there's so many ways to experience it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. But I think that that's like a beautiful way to react. And I think that there is a little bit, I mean, all experiences are valid, right? All emotional experiences of miscarriage are valid, but there is this overdetermination of the emotional experience of that, which I think, yes, again, comes from this like stereotypical understanding of what that experience is about. And like, just like any other termination of pregnancy, right? Like just like abortion, it can be a great
it can be joyful
for some people, right?
Yeah.
And I think it's important to keep that in mind, that we don't need to like, it's part of the misogyny of our culture that we kind of overdetermine what a female emotional experience should be.
And what was your like kind of emotional experience, if any, of
I wasn't disappointed in that early pregnancy, and with that comes a lot of miscarriages, and also wonder if my thinking about it was slightly softer because I do know that we have 2 embryos. So there was no loss of hope that there would be other
interesting
other attempts and other possibilities. So I wonder if that
it kind of gives you the sense that there's more options to try or something.
Fundamentally, if you have a miscarriage, you've lost something that you really wanted, and assuming you wanted it, and you're not, and you hope that you can do that again, that you can get pregnant again. So like hope has to,
But it's no longer a referendum also on your like fertility status when you know that you've created other embryos, right?
We had the miscarriage in June-ish.
June.
And then we decided to go back to the fertility clinic.
We decided to try IUI. Yeah, so I thought, well, let's get science involved. And it turns out that so for IUI is basically just exactly what we were doing at home, except with a nurse's intervention. So they test your blood levels to verify that you are ovulating, and then they insert the sample themselves. So it's literally exactly the same thing, and they're tracking nearly the same thing. But in my mind, it's now we've involved a clinic. Now we've involved like science. So it's going to be so much more scientific. Just saying it's not. It's like they're not using any more sophisticated system other than you are at home.
So we went there, we did a cycle of IUI, which is just as you described, and I offered up the donation, and we went through the process and did not work. Nothing did not work. Amrita asks specifically, do I need to wait until I get my period again before we try another time? Otherwise, meaning, do I need to give a little time between the miscarriage and my next cycle? And the fertility clinic says, no, you can just jump right back in. In retrospect, I think we should have listened to our own, because we had conversations at home, and both of our guts were like, we need to wait.
Yeah.
until
and I think it's a really like powerful thing to like pause on that, because like again it's this the idea of this unwavering respect for the medical medical advice or medical opinions, and then putting your own sort of gut instincts to the wayside. But for this particular instance, like we knew that we probably should have waited, and we didn't, and we ended up spending a lot of money that I kind of regret spending on the IUI process, and I think it later became clear that it would have been potentially better for us to have waited.
I should say also, the doctor told you,
one of the doctors
told you that no one ever gets pregnant using the syringe method. And so the fertility clinic, I should say, there was a main doctor, but she seemed to be on vacation in Mykonos all fucking summer. So
which good for her, God bless.
Every time, yeah, right. Every time Amrita went, it seemed like she was with some other doctor. No one ever read the notes. So every time it was this frustrating challenge of explaining our relationship over and over again.
Every single time. It was like, so I'm confused. So you are not sexually active. So you are sexually active, but not with this person. It was just like this whole like sort of rundown every single time. I'm like, oh my God, this is like.
Yeah. So speaking of optimally shoulds, how did this successful attempt come to pass?
So we had the IUI, and then we tried the syringe for the second time, and for the second time it worked.
Yeah, so I guess this is like Andrew has a smug expression simply to say to the doctor who said that it rarely works, or like this, like it just that doesn't happen. We're 2 for 2 on successful
back
successful pregnancies. The only times we've tried that, it has worked. Basically, I think that's true.
Yeah, we tried twice. It worked twice.
Yeah. So
dangerous information for people who want to get pregnant. Yeah. But that's like a really powerful experience to have, and also in the face of these experiences of feeling like quite invalidated by people who are clearly not able to put you into a easy box about like what your relationship was to each other and how this process would work.
Right.
Yeah. And I remember you, I think it was like July, saying to me at some point, like, oh, how old do you think you want to be when you get pregnant? Like what is your plan, timeline or something along those lines? This question.
Yeah, I guess.
And I asked you back and you were like, oh yeah, I've been trying. And I was like, whoa, oh God. I thought you just like had embryos in the bank to like pull out like Rihanna later. Like I didn't have a sense that was like any of these processes had been going on for so long.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it was August that that the second syringe was successful, and it was
August 2022.
So pretty much a year after
over that summer, we had been, putting together all the things that needed to put together for our shoot for a short film we were doing. It was, and the short film, I should say, is about this very topic.
Based on it's inspired by our relationship, I should say.
That's a better way, yeah.
And it involves, the idea of non-traditional family and becoming pregnant.
And it was the night of the first shoot. It was a 3-day shoot, and we had been up since
5 a.m.
Early morning, and we got home, and Amrita said, she had mentioned it to me earlier in the day, oh, I think this is the window, to prepare me, because she knew it was going to be a long day and I was going to want to go home and go to bed. And then we got home, and she's like, it's the window. And I was like, I'm ready.
Like, we can't do this.
We gotta be up tomorrow. We have 2 more days.
This is a huge project for us. We've spent all year putting it together.
I gotta, but I said, but if you want to try, and she's like, yeah, I mean, I think.
I said, let's try once. Let's try one time. We do not have to spend this whole shoot weekend perseverating on this, but let's just do it one and done, and then
then we'll say we tried this.
And we'll say we tried this month.
And so that was that, and so that one and done worked, and
which is such
poetic,
so funny.
It was during the film shoot.
and the film is like about our relationship, and so that all was like written down, and the shot list was made, and everything was all in place, and then like that the baby was actually conceived that the first day of the shoot.
So your film and your baby are just gonna emerge into the world simultaneously.
Yeah.
I love this. And how do you feel now?
I think there's just a weird poeticism to how that happened. Like moment of kismet brings together some of the other threads we've been talking about like, the fulfillment of the creative self and not wanting to lose that. And it's like, how fitting is it that the culmination of this huge project, or, a huge moment in this project that coincides with the moment of the conception of this baby is like, I don't know, that's like, you can't write fiction.
Things felt like they just came right on time, and it all sort of fit together. And of course, it's easier to think in retrospect. I'm glad that, didn't happen a year earlier.
That's also something that's interesting, that it's like, if it had happened, like if we had figured out the right system right away, it would have actually thrown a huge wrench in our plans to actually execute our first short,
I mean, as Zora Neale Hurston says, right, like there are years that ask questions and years that answer. Maybe this year's answering multiple questions at the same time. It's like abundance, overflowing.
I love that.
Yeah.
The gravity of something that's happened to me, it takes a little time for things to sink in, even the good stuff that happens. I don't immediately feel like really happy about something good that's happened. It just, I'm slower to come to it. So August 2022, I'm pleased. I'm happy.
Mm-hmm.
Now I'm excited, but that's months later.
Yeah. For me, that has been a huge like psychological change too, of like, getting excited, getting prepared, and it's like still ongoing, even though now I'm pretty deep into the pregnancy from where we sit right now. But it's taken a while.
And this might be a woo-woo question that we cut, but when you imagine your baby now, what do you imagine?
That was a big progression for me. I really didn't conceive of it as anything for quite a long time. I was so cautious at the beginning that I didn't take the time to think of it as anything at all. And that's partially, I've been doing some catching up on the back half of this pregnancy of emotional catching up to that.
Yeah. And for you, I think it's a different process, because I think, for a lot of people who get into a partnership with the aim of building a family, there's a years-long discussions of like, what do we want? Do we want a family? Yes, we want a family. Okay, let's try for a family. And this was a relatively rapid progression. Like, relatively speaking, you went from like
in a
just
year.
a couple years ago being like definitely just holding the door open for this possibility, but not like specifically envisioning a family in this way, to like very rapidly being like, okay,
it's happening.
But like, what is that? All of the processing of like, okay, I'm going to be a parent and I'm going to be an active parent and all that stuff. Very new.
It's new. Yeah. So that's part of the catch up too. But I would turn the woo-woo question to you.
I see a little swaddled little bean.
A bean.
Little bean. He coos, and then he does his, he's not crying in the ideal world.
Yeah, that makes sense.
But when he cries, I like look at him to make sure to try to learn why he's crying. But he's just a little bean.
A little bean. I love that.
In our next episode, what has the pregnancy itself been like? We take you by the hand and gently guide you through the hellscape of the modern American healthcare system, and how we navigated it as a non-traditional family. In the meantime, you can find Marina Weiss, poet and clinical psychologist, at marinaweiss.com, We are at vjandstevens.com or at vjandstevens on Instagram. That's VIJAY and Stevens with a PH.